quick things to start off. First off, the session will be recorded. So for folks not in RenCo, or sorry, folks in RenCo that couldn't make it, feel free to ping it to them when we're done. Secondly, there will be a feedback form after. And my only requirement when you come to one of my events is that you do fill out the feedback form. For the main reason being, the feedback is incredibly helpful. And I think, Josh, you'll see once folks fill it out, but that's often one of the best things that we get from our speakers is that they say the feedback is incredible. So if you want to please Josh and please Jen, please fill out the feedback form. We'll start off with a quick bio. So this is Josh. Josh is a co-founder of Levels. He's a mechanical engineer and CrossFit L2 trainer. He first was at SpaceX, where he led a team to develop life support systems that in May of 2020 began sustaining astronauts on trips to the International Space Station aboard Crew Dragon, the first human-rated commercial spacecraft in history. Not too shabby. Josh has also spent time designing and building Hyperloop technology and leading engineering for a company providing vehicle-based rescue systems for emergency response teams. I think one thing I'd like to highlight is very interesting, varied background that we'll hopefully get into. Josh enjoys the outdoors, functional fitness training, technology, coffee, and restoring motorcycles. And as for me, your moderator, my name is Charles. I currently work at Mindstrong Health, telehealth company serving members with severe mental illness. Previously worked at Uber, work in finance. I love tech, markets, economics, and if you're in RenCo, you probably see me give an opinionated view on some subject here or there and get into way too many debates on Slack. So I think the first thing I wanted to get into, I think there's a lot of things to cover. Everyone's super excited about Levels. But the first thing, the most important question, which Jen kind of alluded to, was I think I'm in a bit of a pickle because right before this event, I thought about, should I have dinner before? I had some dinner, included pita bread. And now I'm really worried that at some point in this event, my glucose is going to spike and I'm going to pass out and I won't be able to do it. So did I make a huge mistake, Josh, by eating carbs before this event?
Well, you really can't know unless you have the data, huh?
Although
I know that I would be having a hypoglycemic response right now after a huge spike, I can't say the same for you because you just might be more metabolically fit than me.
Something tells me that's unlikely, but for those who don't know about Levels, you're talking about hypoglycemic spike, metabolic fitness. So for those who don't know, maybe you could give us a brief overview of what Levels is, how the product works, and what the goals of Levels are.
Yeah, so Levels is the first biowearable. So it's a wearable system, including a sensor and software that exists to answer the question, what should I eat and why? So we have a lot of wearables in our lives today that track our exercise, they track our sleep. Oftentimes they track pulse, heart rate variability. They don't typically get below the skin and tell you what's happening in terms of molecular activity inside your body. And in particular, the fuel sources that we're using to power our brains and our bodies. And with the advent of microelectronics, we've had some amazing medical devices produced. One of them is the continuous glucose monitor. And this device was originally developed for managing diabetes, but it's now getting to a point where it's in a form factor and at a price point where it makes sense to start to use this technology, even if you don't have a diagnosed condition. And in fact, my argument is that given the rates of preventable chronic illness related to metabolic dysfunction, glucose dysregulation, insulin resistance, it may be even more necessary that this technology be adopted by the mainstream without diabetes yet in order to curb the trends of metabolic dysfunction we're seeing. I'll just throw one stat out there, but there are currently something like 88 million people in the United States alone with prediabetes. Of them, 84% don't know they have it. And you can't change something you don't know it exists. So you're not going to manage something you can't measure. So it's important that this get mainstream adoption and that we, at a social scale, start to take metabolic fitness seriously, just the way we take physical fitness and mental fitness seriously. And Levels is looking to lead the charge there.
So, you talked about not even being able to measure, right? Some if people are pre-diabetes. I think you have a really interesting story about how you came here. I think maybe if we have time, we could get into, you know, your background in hardware and SpaceX. I think we could do a whole hour-long talk on that. But, you know, it was really interesting to read. You can tell us about how you basically formed your own levels product to try to figure this out about yourself, where you pinpricked yourself. I think I read 60 times a day, put it in an Excel sheet. So why don't you tell us about, you know, the story for you personally, how you came to learning about this, and then how you came to starting Levels because of it.
Yeah, it was basically a patient zero example where I was getting to a point in my career where the stakes were highest. I was leading a team. It was a really important project. I wanted to crush it. And I was working every hour I could, every day, sleeping when I could, eating whatever was available. But always taking care to work out. That's always been my foundation. You know, my impression growing up was that if you're physically fit, you are healthy. That's about as close to an approximation as you can make. And so being a CrossFit trainer on the side, I made time to get into the gym. So I was always in good, you know, physical condition, or at least aesthetically exterior. You know, I looked healthy at least, and I thought I should be healthy. But anyway, I'm getting through this project at SpaceX and basically burning out mentally and physically very quickly. And my mood was garbage. I was irritable. I would go through these kind of waves of literal physical fatigue where I had to sit down. I mean, I would get these like shakiness episodes and this cold sweat sensation, and my stomach would turn, and all this weird sort of symptomatic stuff. And I was addicted to coffee, generally just dragging myself through every day. And I actually went to my doctor and said, I think I have a terminal illness. Like I need some help here to figure out what's going wrong, because I don't feel the way I should. That's just I can't say any more than that. It's just something's wrong. And so we did a bunch of blood panels, and it really came back with all my numbers were in range. Nothing was really out of the ordinary. And I'm looking at this piece of paper, and it's telling me nothing. I know that the body is a dynamic system. Things are changing constantly. I'm providing inputs. My body's responding. But I'm just looking at a few numbers that are measured once a year. And so that just didn't feel right with me. It didn't sit well with me. I wanted objective data to guide my decisions the way I have objective data that guides basically every other choice I make in my life. So essentially, I started studying the human kind of energy system, the metabolism, to try to figure out what I could maybe measure. And the first thing that popped out is glucose. You know, this is the primary energy molecule for modern humans. And you can go to a CVS, you can pick up this little prick device called a glucometer, stick your finger, and you get your glucose measurement right then and there. So I did that, started plotting my glucose levels in an Excel sheet. And I think, yeah, at my most obsessive, I did prick my fingers 60 times in a day. And that was mostly like a cloud of measurements in the morning, a cloud of measurements in the evening, and nothing in between, because I'm working and then sleeping. And so it was really not very useful. But through this process, I started to study glucose data, read primary literature on it, and I came across continuous glucose monitors. And these are devices that were developed in the lab, eventually moved into therapeutics for diabetes management. And I immediately went to my doctor and asked for a prescription. My doctor said, you do not need to care about this. This is for people who have, you know, uncontrolled diabetes. And ultimately that didn't sit well with me, again, because I was going to measure this anyway. It was happening in my body. I just wanted access to it. And so I eventually did get a CGM. And within about 2 weeks, I had spent the majority, the significant majority of my time outside the normal range, according to the American Diabetes Association. So my blood sugar was erratic, uncontrolled, and really high. So my average glucose was like over 100, which is considered a pre-diabetic threshold. My postprandial, so my post-meal levels, were significantly worse than I had ever expected, always going above the pre-diabetic threshold, staying above 140 milligrams per deciliter for multiple hours, and then they would come crashing down. And that's right when I would start to feel these symptoms, these shakiness episodes and the irritability. So that was the light bulb. You know, it was just the moment where I first saw that there was a problem that I could kind of tackle. I used that data to completely change my approach to nutrition, and certainly to change my mentality around sleep and stress management. And I saw a really amazing change over a few months. So I was doing this continuously, and eventually all of that sort of irrational kind of, or not irrational, that uncontrollable fluctuation started to even out, and my glucose levels came down, my average came down, my post-meal spikes came down. And I can talk about the specifics there, but at the end of the day, I no longer had these bottoms in my fatigue. It was like sort of a continuous energy that, although I'm not lifting cars every day, I don't have those episodes where I'm crashing. So that was the experience. It was the realization that there's an accessibility issue. This is pretty incredible technology. There's an actionability issue. Once you get it, you really have to figure out what's going on and know what to target and what to aim for. And so, given my own personal experience and the fact that I now understood the connection between glucose irregularity and not just diabetes, but cardiovascular disease and dementia, both of which run in my family, I wanted to take this seriously. I wanted to expand access to this to try to turn the ships, so to speak, with this crazy trend of silent metabolic dysfunction.
So we already have a bunch of questions. I think we'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and just feel free to drop them in the chat. But I think one question I have before we get to those is, a lot of what you're saying to me makes a lot of sense, and I'm curious, because I actually brought this up to my doctor once about, like, is it worth getting a CGM? And he had a very similar response, which is kind of like, we did the we did your blood test, it shows everything's fine, like, that's it, like that's what kind of we're taught. Would you say levels and kind of your beliefs, and maybe the beliefs of most folks at levels, is not mainstream, right? Is it kind of a bet on both, the technology, but also that certain things are going to change in terms of how the medical establishment thinks about glucose monitoring, thinks about, the value of this data? How much are you betting on, like, well, it's tech that, everyone wants, versus like, we're actually gonna have a change in how the medical establishment also looks at this?
I think it's going to be a transformation in a positive sense, where people have better intel themselves about how their bodies are functioning, but then that transitions into the patient-physician relationship, where every conversation is informed by a huge amount of data about lifestyle and about this person's metabolic function, their bodily function. Whereas right now we take a single point measurement typically, and this will either be a fasting glucose check, or maybe an A1C, which is kind of an estimate of average glucose over the past 90 days. But with real-time data, you don't need to estimate these things. You can have that continuous curve, and you can not only see things like averages, which are interesting, but what's more interesting is, how is the body responding to stressors? So when you eat a large carbohydrate-filled meal, how well does your body tolerate that? How well does it break it down? And that's an indication of insulin sensitivity, which is the hormone that helps to modulate glucose. So when you have this real-time data, it's a really profound look into how this person is dynamically responding. And we are complex systems. We're basically chemistry sets. There's a bunch of chemicals going on inside, and chemicals respond to other chemicals. You flood the body with glucose, insulin has to flood the bloodstream to clear it out. And if you start to get biased in one direction or another, you start to see hyperinsulinemia, where you have constant elevated levels of insulin. Your cells can become numb to it. And that can cause this irregularity with glucose, where you can no longer control it effectively. And it doesn't happen overnight. It develops over decades in most cases, where slowly but surely you get this dynamic breakdown, and eventually you end up with complications that may or may not include diabetes, but they can certainly touch things like cardiovascular disease. As I mentioned, Alzheimer's is being called by some researchers type 3 diabetes, because of the way the brain becomes insulin resistant. PCOS, which is the leading cause of infertility in the United States, seems to be insulin resistance of the ovaries. So there's this massive sort of network of conditions that are often called different things, but tend to come back to chronic lifestyle related illnesses of the metabolic system. And so I don't think what Levels is focusing on is by any means out of left field or fringe. It's more so just data enabled. And we haven't gotten to the point where this would be possible, where everyone could be kind of an N of one experiment of their own, until really the past 5-10 years. So I think it's just a matter of bringing this adoption and making it available both for the individual, and also to allow providers to be able to just level up their care and start from a position of data.
Yeah, and and maybe, to summarize what you're saying, right? If you only have one data point a year, then maybe that data point isn't helpful, and therefore that's how the medical establishment has kind of come to its conclusions. But once you have the data, then kind of it'll just be natural that we're going to be able to find things that we couldn't before. So it just makes sense. We have a bunch of questions on kind of other changes you made in your life around that time, how you changed your nutrition. I do think there's, I know you've talked about this a lot and written about it a lot, but maybe let's just jump to a couple other questions first. So I think the first one that I'm seeing, which I had a similar question, is the demographics of Levels users, both maybe current users and those on the wait list. One question was, are these people trying to lose weight? Is it people who are performance athletes? What's the kind of feedback that you've gotten on your product, and has it changed in terms of how you thought people are going to use your product?
Yeah, so we initially were targeting something like a biohacker as our launch audience. So somebody who is already very interested in testing everything and getting all these special blood tests and taking supplements and such. And that seemed like the easiest market to attract the attention of, because of course, how do you attract the attention of the mainstream audience if nobody talks about metabolism or metabolic fitness? But we've been blown away by the uptake well outside of biohackers. Certainly a huge portion of our audience is currently like tech executive type of person. So we've just gotten a ton of tech Twitter interest, which honestly has been great at raising our signal. But that has kind of branched out through some of our content efforts, specifically podcasts. I've done a lot of podcasts to just kind of talk about this concept, and that's been really amazing because it's led to a lot of demographic sort of spread through different populations, like the weight loss community and the organic, like nutrition, sort of healthy eating community, for example, which we expected were going to be multiple years out. And so now our wait list is really impressively diverse. It is not a biohacker audience at all. In fact, the biohackers are a minority. What I would call the current majority inside of it is the health seeker. So it's somebody who is like keeping their ear to the ground about interesting trends in health, and they're willing to pay for a product that is, and in the case of Levels, we're certainly currently a premium product in terms of our price point. So these might be folks who already have a wearable, or certainly have a gym membership or a Peloton bike. But the goal of Levels is not just to be an interesting toy or kind of a frivolous fad. It's something that we genuinely want to make a difference in the trends in metabolic health. And so the goal is to launch this premium product, but to kind of follow a Tesla-like approach where we get these early adopters, these health seekers. We then expand into concentric rings of adoption. So into those weight loss markets, the healthy eating space, folks who are aging and want to make sure that they're sustaining, maintaining independence and longevity. And these markets are, they're far, far larger than the total addressable market of CGM today. So of a disease-focused CGM, which focuses on type 1 diabetes, that's a very small total addressable market. So by accessing these really large mainstream markets, I think we can kind of unlock some supply and demand, which can drive down unit economics. So the price of the CGM itself can get better. And then we can use all of the data we're generating combined with some focused clinical efforts to show efficacy, to just show that this is not meaningless data for data's sake. This is people are making decisions that are improving at the earliest stages of metabolic dysfunction, improving their numbers and their risk of chronic illness. And that's the way that we're going to get insurance coverage over time. And ultimately, that's the key to bring this to everyone into a mainstream market, is to make sure that we're slowly but surely ratcheting our way towards that ultimate, provider covered or payer covered product that everyone can access.
Yeah, there's actually a question which maybe you saw, which was, it's will Levels offer health insurance? But I feel like maybe, I don't know if the question meant that health insurers were offer Levels. I mean, if Levels becomes a health insurer, that would be quite the change. But I think Marissa had a question as well. I think Marissa has a lot of questions. I think I'd love to hear from Marissa if you want to unmute, because I think a lot of the questions you have along the lines of like from the medical point of view, right? So you mentioned kind of moving from wellness to medical clinical studies, engaging with the FDA. Yeah, do you want to ask maybe some shortened version of all of them together?
Sure, or you can, you know, pick and choose your favorite. But yeah, I was just wondering sort of how you're thinking about moving levels from a wellness product to a medical product, and just thinking about the amount of growth that you've already had, and you know, whether that's sort of catalyzing your motivation to move more into like a regulated space, or whether you're still trying to kind of strike a balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we're actively thinking about. We, as I mentioned, we kind of expected to be several years earlier on the growth curve than we are. And so that's good. I mean, it's a good problem to have for sure. But the clinical strategy is a meaningful part of our focus right now, is understanding what regulatory frameworks we have to function within, and what the end goal is. You know, is this something that we want to make into a therapeutic product the way that, say, Livongo and Onduo and Omada, these other companies, are focusing very much on post-diagnosis? Or is this something that we want to maintain kind of positioning in the pre-diagnosis space? And that covers a lot of ground, and I think could potentially provide the most value currently. So rather than going and competing in those spaces, we can instead focus on people who are, you know, in that pre-diabetic metabolic syndrome sort of space where things they're not great. And there's a lot of these folks. There are something like 88, well, the University of North Carolina published a study that showed that 88% of US adults are metabolically unhealthy in some way. So it's unclear, you know, exactly to what degree that is glucose intolerance or anything like that. But, you know, we probably will maintain a wellness positioning, focusing on people who are pre-diagnosis for sure, but kind of coming up against that threshold. So weight loss, certainly focusing on insulin resistance and glucose intolerance as a screening measure. But, you know, the degree to which we become a medical device, I think, is going to be to be determined. We you know, the FDA certainly is paying attention to products like ours, which they interface with a medical device. So the CGM being, it breaks the skin. It certainly is a class 2 or class 3 medical device. The software that shows you the data, there's been some guidance, and, you know, we're engaging with people there and at the manufacturers to figure out where we fall. You know, should we immediately proceed to becoming a medical device, or is this something that we have some kind of grace period until we start moving into post-diagnosis? Ultimately, I would like this to be available to everyone. You know, anyone who is using a CGM should be able to use the operating system that makes it insightful and actionable.
And Josh, just as a quick follow-up, you mentioned a whole host of metabolic conditions, including, you know, PCOS and dementia, as well as, you know, more typical cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Are you, is the extent to which you're sort of coaching people as to how to understand the implications of their blood sugars covering all of those dimensions? Or are you really pretty focused on diabetes at this point?
Well, right now we're focusing on metabolic awareness and metabolic fitness as the key concepts that we want people to think about. And it's this recognition that most people don't walk around wondering, am I going to get diabetes? That really is out of sight, out of mind for many people, unless you had a family member that had it. And unfortunately, that it ends up, I think, creeping up on people because it's out of sight, out of mind. We're flying blind daily, and then many other people just don't know the connection between these non-diabetic metabolic syndromes. And so it's an education effort, definitely talking about all of the ways in which metabolic dysfunction can touch someone, and making sure that people are thinking about this as like it is rooted in the lifestyle choices we're all making. We sit down, we eat something for lunch every day. What do we eat and why? And if we really don't have confidence in those decisions and we compound them in the wrong direction over time, this can manifest in many negative ways. So that's kind of the effort is all around education about all of the potential metabolic dysfunctions. And then, and then once you're in the product, it's all about awareness. So recognizing the way your body's responding specifically to things like nutrition, exercise modalities, sleep, and stress management. And you can start to see the way that these 4 levers really affect the way your body can process the food you're eating. And then ultimately the goal is to, through focus, effort, and repetition, improve your metabolic condition. And then we don't have to talk too much about the the diseases themselves, but rather just focusing on this aspirational concept of just daily optimization of metabolic function.
Marissa, do you mind? I should have introduced you at the beginning because I think you're probably the most perfect person for this talk, but I know you did work at the FDA, or at least were an advisor there, right, Marissa? It might be helpful for you to give just a quick bio, because I think it's very relevant to this talk.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I don't want to monopolize. I'm just super interested. I'm, as I mentioned, when we first came on, an endocrinologist and internist, and I worked for about 7 years at FDA, on and off the last 4, so focused on digital health policy at CDRH.
I would love to connect with Marissa after the call too, and learn more.
Sure, absolutely.
Cool. So we're at about the halfway mark. I think there's a lot of questions to come back to you on this section, but I'd love to get to some questions just generally about startup building. And so, we just talked about the wait list. As best I can tell, I mean, you could tell me, I can't imagine Levels has done a ton of paid marketing. And so, you're in this extremely enviable position that everyone on this call wants to know how to get into, which is building a startup without spending much money and getting a ton of organic word of mouth growth and a ton of positive feedback, right? And so could you tell us about, how that strategy, if it was ever a strategy, came about, how you've executed on it, and like what you've learned from being able to generate this organic growth?
Yeah, I mean, killer organic traction was always the strategy. It was just not clear whether it was going to work. But yeah, it's really hard to predict these things. When you're in the concept phase, it's hard not to get stuck in your own experience and projecting that onto everyone in the world. It's like, well, why wouldn't everyone want this? This is the greatest thing ever. We're all in that mindset as founders. But I was actually really confident that this was going to be a kind of a social success, in the sense that people would want to share this actively because of a few kind of elements that the product has to it. The biggest one is the sort of emotion and uncertainty component, where nutrition and health are just highly emotional by default. So people want any amount of confidence that they can that the decisions they're making are good. And so the fact that this touches on a big blind spot, which is nutrition and or health status, I think that's a big one for people. Products can touch on that. And then there's a visual component. So there's this like unique wearable element that you have on your skin. It's in a location that it's not the watch, it's not the wrist location. So when other people see it, it's a conversation starter. So I had that experience myself. A lot of people would ask me what that is. I launched conversations. I felt really good. This is probably going to be a viral effect. And then lastly, there's this individuality piece where, what works or does not work for someone else doesn't necessarily protract onto me. So it's an interesting opportunity for people to share their uniqueness, both positive and negative. Like, this thing counterintuitively is really bad for me or is really good for me, and this other thing is the opposite. It allows for this organic conversation starting and continuous sharing, where different people have different experiences and can be interested by that and what it may be grounded in. So I felt really good about the potential for organic sharing. I think that those elements are what got us to where we are, but also combined with a healthy amount of just good timing. I think people just hadn't heard of this technology. And so it seems out of left field and super bionic, that you can put this patch on and scan it and get your blood sugar information in real time. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Have you been able to tap into communities? I mean, so it's very clear to me, at least, that tech Twitter and maybe Twitter has been a really key avenue of growth. Are there communities that people talk, compare the results in, maybe Facebook groups? Like, how much have you fostered community on your end to try to make it not, a lonely effort when you get your Levels patch?
Yeah, community is something we're focusing on in the primary product directly right now, thinking of ways that we can foster this. But we do have a Facebook group for our members, and that's really amazing because it's totally transformed over a very brief time. Like, we had a kind of a step function change in the number of people going through the program. And so a huge amount of engagement went into that Facebook group. And it's amazing to see recipes and recommendations coming so quickly. And so that that's definitely going to be a big component of the Levels growth plan, is to incorporate more community, and specifically across all different sub communities, right? We want to make sure that whether you are an athlete trying to shave a 10K time down, or someone who needs to lose 100 pounds, the underlying philosophies and technology is the same, but the community and the way you go about achieving your goals are going to be slightly different, and so it's important that we have the ability for all these people to find others similar to them going through similar journeys, and meet them where they are.
Another interesting thing about building Levels that I came across, we spoke during COVID, but I remember when we were talking last year that you were saying that Levels has been remote first since the beginning, which I believe was pre-COVID, right? 2019.
Yep.
And so, I know Levels isn't making its own hardware yet, but nonetheless, I kind of think of it as a hardware company in a lot of ways. And so it seems like you've been successful at building this remote culture, being able to build the company pretty effectively while remote, which I think to most people might be a little surprising, right? Especially with more of a hardware product. What have you done that has been able to, successfully navigate being remote pre-COVID and post-COVID, and what can others learn from building a startup remote?
Well, we do have a hardware component to the package. When you buy the Levels kit, it's delivered through a pharmacy partner, and that pharmacy partner for us is TruePill. So they're basically our third-party logistics organization, but they're also a licensed pharmacy with 50-state mail order capability, which is phenomenal. So it allows, and this is actually a regulatory consideration, we would not be able to deliver these kits ourselves out of a warehouse, right? You have to be a licensed facility to handle prescription products. So that partnership is key to enable us to be kind of to be a remote organization without a central facility or warehouse hub. But in terms of like building a remote culture, this is my first go at remote. Previously, I was doing all hardware startups where I had to be on site. But some of the things we've done are, firstly, we're a memo-driven culture. So we do not try and hash things out on Zoom calls. We identify a stakeholder and we have them write a long form piece that is the most researched perspective in the company. And then everyone else can kind of comment on that asynchronously. And we come up with a list of action items asynchronously. And so we've essentially canceled all meetings. We have 2 team meetings. One is kind of leadership. The other is all hands, and that's it per week. Any other meetings, there's I can't really think of a single meeting that I've had in the past 2 weeks besides those 2. So the beauty of that is that by being memo driven, everyone is documenting the work they're doing. We use Notion as our repository and sort of discoverability, and it's creating this really awesome autonomy where people not only can seize control of their day-to-day lifestyles, but also we don't lose track of anything. I mean, anytime an investor or a potential candidate to join the team needs any information, we can just point them right to the memos that we've written, and it's a really nice mile marker system. So less meetings, more memos. And then I think in order to function in that environment, you really need to bias towards, I think certainly for us right now, we're focusing on generalists who have that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. They'd probably be starting a company if they weren't working with us. And that's key to just come into an environment where you don't have someone, you're not doing one-on-one calls, where you're getting action items, you're selecting for yourself what you should focus on. And then maybe the last one would be, we really drive for transparency and communication. So not just the honesty or integrity part of that, but making information visible to everyone. So if you go in our Slack, we try to do 0 DMs and just have information exchanged in public channels. And that just allows you to, if you're interested, you can catch up on what other departments are doing. But more importantly, it just gives you a feel for the energy of the company and what's happening beyond you, because if you're sitting in your room coding all day and you've had a rough week and haven't really gotten your project out of the way, it's nice to be able to see success happening on other parts of the organization, to just feel okay, despite this garbage week for me, the whole company's moving forward. I'm part of something bigger. It just helps with morale.
It would seem like, my reaction to this is that it would seem like it'd be difficult to build this starting off non-remote and going remote. I mean, I've had that experience now with two companies, which were companies that started not remote and then went remote. And yeah, I think the thought of like getting rid of all meetings is almost like foreign, I think, to the companies I've worked at. And so maybe that's the conclusion also here, right? Is like, you really have to start from the beginning and build that culture. I also thought it was fascinating, you know, when you think about what it takes today to build, if you thought about a CGM company in 1990 versus a CGM company today, what would be required to build that business in 1990? You probably wouldn't be using, AWS. You'd need your own real estate to see everyone in person. You would need a place to warehouse, all your items before you send it out. And now you could literally start a startup with no real estate, no in person over COVID. And, I think that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. I mean, the COVID thing, I don't want to make it out that, I am one of the lucky ones, no doubt about it. I don't want to make this out to be a positive thing, but it's been a real test of the entire technology industry. And everyone's been questioning their assumptions about what are the table stakes to have a good company. And so being remote prior to this, it was just kind of vindication that, it did not disrupt anything about our operations. And so, ultimately, I am definitely a believer in remote as a possible like world-class organization structure. I think it gets tricky if you do have, on-site hardware development. Like SpaceX going remote would be really tricky. I don't, lots of functions could, but when you're the person who's trying to get, like large pieces of metal cut right now, it's a little bit different.
Maybe let's jump to SpaceX real quick, because with a bio like yours, right? I read at the beginning, the developing life support systems that this year sustained astronauts on trips to the ISS aboard Crew Dragon, the first human-rated commercial spacecraft in history. That's pretty awesome. I feel like after that, you probably don't have to do that much, but here you are. So just tell us about, you spent around 6 years there. Obviously SpaceX, there's a lot to talk about in terms of working for Elon Musk and this really transformative company. But what was it like working there, and kind of what did you learn, and how are you applying the lessons from a company like that to Levels today?
It was unbelievable to work there, mostly because the team is just so good. And I was always by far the worst person in any room at my job. And that was a good feeling, actually, because you're just constantly absorbing the methods of these really great engineers. And so as an engineer, as someone who is a total gearhead and just obsessed with machines, it was a fantasy factory. You go, the raw material comes into that building and rockets and spaceships leave. And it's hard to describe something that would be a better fit for me. So as an individual, what I like to do, it was a dream fit. And, and then to be able to work on the human rated spacecraft development process there. So I was one of the first 4 to be on that team. And, that was huge. It was basically like redesigning the internal processes of SpaceX over again, because now there were regulators involved and customers, NASA was involved, not to mention human lives. And so it was kind of like another whole round of education and getting to talk to people who had worked on the space shuttle development and people who had been involved in NASA's human rated programs for decades, and talk to the astronauts who eventually flew on it and develop a system that people were relying on to stay alive in the vacuum of space was, again, like just an unbelievable opportunity. And I'll genuinely never forget it. I may, at some point down the line go back, just because I love it so much. And there's so many cool things still happening over there, like the Starship program, which I think is going to revolutionize cost to get into space. So and then like things I took away from that, really the first thing I said, people, it was the education I needed to show me that, doing things alone is probably not the best way to do them. And if you can bring on force multipliers, like people that are better than you, that's the best way to achieve success. It's just such a good feeling to bring someone on to a team and like watch the pace of progress multiply essentially overnight. So I think that learning that firsthand at SpaceX was key, and we're definitely focusing on that at Levels. And then another one is just taking like an execution oriented approach. So always biasing towards progress rather than perfection. So if you can ship another iteration, even if it's not perfect, that's key to getting feedback, to seeing if you're heading in the right direction, and to course correcting if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you say you maybe want to go back at some point in the future clearly is a testament to the impact it made. So one question I wanted to get back to on the level side was we talked a lot about the wait list, and I think we had one question from the audience, which was basically like, you have 75,000 people on the wait list. How do you determine who gets it? Is it just alphabetical order? Are you thinking strategically about high profile people that could really boost your product? You want to get in their hands and have them disseminate it? And how do you think about your strategy? Having so much demand, how to decide what to do with this, right? And most startups are not in that position, right, where they have all these people clamoring for the product.
Yeah, it's interesting because the wait list originally was supposed to just be the sign up form to get into the beta program. So we're developing the software in real time, and so having people, real paying customers use the product and give you feedback is the best way to ensure that your expectations meet reality, right? So if you just give the product away because it's in beta, you get a bunch of feedback that is relative to that person's price assumptions, right? It's like, this was free, so it's great, everything's great. But if you charge them the price that you plan to launch with, it becomes much more serious, where you're getting nitpicks, and that's where the value lies. So we immediately wanted to go to a paid beta, and so we set up this form so people could sign up for it. We just expected that, like, everyone that goes in, we would just set up the form so that we could interview, get some live feedback from each person, then we would get them into the program. Obviously, that has not been the case. We haven't been able to keep up. So as you mentioned, there are a little bit over 75,000 people as of today, and we've only been able to put 5,000 people through the program. And that's actually a very deliberate decision. Like, we could definitely scale up faster. But until I think early November, we had had conversations with every single person that had gone through the program. So thousands of customer interviews. And that was like the best business intelligence we could get. We were learning from people what they were indexing on for price, why they were interested, who they learned about it from. We understood where the threshold kind of was for subscription pricing. So some people were really into the idea of just using it for 1 month. Some people only wanted to use it if it was a subscription. And both of those people would be interested in a subscription at a price point. And that price point, it turns out, is below $99 a month. So if that was the price, then everyone would default towards a subscription, it seems, or at least the vast majority. So we would not know any of that if we didn't have this like really deep interview process. And myself, Sam, some of the others on the team, Mike DiDonato, if anyone's used the product, you probably spoke with Mike. But we were all doing these interviews, and it kind of got to the point where they were taking up such a meaningful amount of time that we had to scale back. But that process was great. We're going to continue it. But now we have to kind of take a more hands-off approach to inviting people in, and it's definitely focused on goals. So we're doing kind of cohorts, and we'll pick people out of the waitlist and give them an opportunity to convert based on, do they want to lose weight? Are they an athlete? Are they someone who's maybe in the the baby boomer generation who is just interested in learning something and taking their health into their own hands? And so it really is kind of a project basis that we're going at this with, and making sure that we have an assumption about this audience, and then we test that assumption based on feedback, and then check success. How much did this person actually like it at the end of the day?
What's the most surprising thing you learned in your 5,000 interviews with your users?
That's a good question. Probably the most interesting thing is that something like 97% of people that have a Peloton bike will pay full price for the Levels program without any concern. So that was something that popped out where we were like, we have been benchmarking Peloton.
Partnership potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has something to do with like the premium health and fitness crowd. If you're willing to buy a Peloton bike, you're willing to invest in your health, and you want it to be convenient. You want it to be, location, independent, I guess. And so all of those factors come together, and I think Peloton's a great benchmark for us. They have an amazing content platform. They have great community, awesome brand. So that was really fascinating to learn that, and it definitely educated us on the health-seeking audience that we have available. Another big one was we've done some pilots with weight loss, people who are focused on losing weight primarily, and we did a partnership with Justin Mayers, who he runs Kettle and Fire, and which is in Perfect Keto. So he's got a couple like consumer packaged goods companies, and this is called the Wearable Challenge, and basically he just had people sign up, and they would put a wager of like $800 up front, and then they would get the Levels kit. And rather than sticking to some rigorous nutrition advice, their goal was to keep their blood sugar inside the target range 100% of the time. And for every day that you keep your blood sugar in that range, you earn back $25 of that wager. So there's a financial incentive. You go through it in a cohort with a bunch of other people. You're all connected in a chat. And so there's a community piece. And then there's this like independence where you're not being told what not to eat. You can eat whatever you want as long as you're keeping your glucose low. And the underlying concept is that if your blood sugar is controlled, your insulin levels are controlled. And insulin is the anabolic hormone. It's what takes, it's what stores things, it's fat, prevents fat oxidation. So that's the concept. And the average weight lost for people with a high BMI is 9.8 pounds over 28 days without any nutrition guidance. So still not like a clinical trial, still not something that we're, publishing or saying this is statistically significant, but I find it to be very interesting because these people are not out there looking for CGMs. They're out there looking for diet programs. And I didn't expect any interest for many years from the sort of weight loss community.
And Justin has done this a couple times, right? So maybe he's going to have an upcoming, I don't know if he plans on doing it again, but we could plug it.
Yeah, these are actually ongoing. So the 6th cohort is happening right now, and then I think the next one starts in February. So we're just keeping going, and we're learning from each one, and it's been really interesting. Yeah,
I'm curious. I didn't ask at the beginning, but I'm curious if anyone in the chat, just feel free to post if anyone has used Levels. Maybe we have some users here, but I think the weight loss challenge is a great initiative when I saw it, and then the results, were incredible. A lot of questions that I think I could summarize a little bit around, today Levels is a product that is, we have a wait list, to sign up, and, it's kind of like V1, right? And, Marissa, for example, talked about like personalized nutrition, AI tailored nutrition. Jen similarly said, could Levels data be assembled and correlated to outcomes to give personalized nutrition advice? And just the thought of like how this looks in the future, if you talk about Levels like 2 or 3 years or maybe 5 years from now, do you see like personalized nutrition as like a key use case, and diet and weight loss? Because we talked about a lot of things, right? We talked about fitness, how to make sure make sure for certain health outcomes, and then there's just like weight loss, right? I know that, for example, there's a company, Noom, that maybe a bunch of folks here know that. It's pretty simple, right, around weight loss, and seems to be doing pretty well, similar to Weight Watchers, and they don't have any fancy tech. It's literally just trying to convince you to act better. But I think that the bar is very low in terms of what we have today. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, so right now, the largest published data set of non-diabetic glucose information was from the PREDICT trials in the UK, paired, so non-diabetic glucose information paired with lifestyle choices. And so that was about 1,000 people for, I think, 14 days. And so Levels has about 6 to 8 times that today, and rapidly increasing. So we have the largest data set of its kind, and we don't intend to monetize that or sell it or anything along those lines. The intention for that is to drive forward the understanding of metabolic optimization. What does it really mean to be truly healthy metabolically, and not just on average, but for specific phenotypes? So different people have different, I think, struggles, right? So some people gain weight very easily. Some people have a very hard time gaining weight. Some people have a lot more lean muscle mass on their bodies, which is it is a sink for glucose. And so there's just a ton of just individuality, and we'll be able to eventually get to the point where we have enough granularity in our data set that we can not only make targeted predictions for how someone will respond based on our data set, but also targeted recommendations and for a granular granular population as opposed to the entire data set. This is going to take years to get to that point. But the dream here is that health data is used much more like financial data. So you'll be able to pull your phone out and kind of check your status in real time, and you can see the effects of recent choices. You can have an expert come in and give you advice on the fly, and you can make a plan. You really have a plan that projects into the future. And I think the end goal being that you not only have this sort of financial goal for retirement and this financial plan, but you also have the confidence that you're going to be healthy enough to take advantage of that in the future. And I think that to get there, we really need to take the cognitive burden off the end user. It has to be something that is elegant, insightful, and continuous. So when you're compromised on sleep, this system knows it, and it makes recommendations for maybe skipping this meal that you typically eat on Wednesday morning and instead eating this one because you didn't get much sleep last night. And there is such a thing as acute insulin resistance related to the stress of poor sleep. And all of these things can be recognized with sufficient data and with high enough resolution wearables.
And so for you, I guess, have you worn a levels monitor continuously for 2.5 years now? Is that around that?
Yeah, just about. I think the maximum amount of time I've had it off is about a day or so since about 2018. So going on 3 years.
So you've had maybe more CGM data than anyone else using levels, and so I think a lot of people are curious. We had a lot of questions earlier, which is like, what have you learned and what do you personally do? And I know probably you're going to give the caveat, which has been really interesting reading some of the literature and hearing you on podcasts talk about studies, right, that show some people react completely differently to the same foods, right? Mm-hmm. So definitely, we won't take this as nutrition advice for all of us, but it'd be interesting to hear just how you've changed your life and what you've learned about what your body can and can't do and how you've optimized it.
Sure. Yeah. And I would actually, I just saw a good question from Assad. And sorry, there have been great questions all the way throughout, sure, but I think this one got a lot of attention. So if you don't mind, I'd like to address that Theranos one, because it is.
I get overruled easily.
Well, yeah. So do orgs like Levels see any bad taste in consumers or investors' mouths from the negative experiences around Theranos and perception of cool, minimally invasive health tech? This was a big theme of discussion and throughout the company's history. And the benefit is that this technology is not a promised miracle on the horizon. It's something that people with diabetes have been using to manage their conditions, life-threatening conditions, from pediatrics, so little kids, all the way up to people who are in their 90s, are using these devices in real time today and have been for going on a decade. And so that's the benefit, is that we're not promising, a solution that may one day exist. It's something that currently exists and has existed, and the FDA has approved for truly life-saving care through the management of type 1 diabetes. So that's been a huge benefit to us, to not have to try to demonstrate some sort of breakthrough in the hardware. That being said, I do think that glucose is not a panacea. It's a really good metric to track. It's important for health. It is closely related with when it's dysfunctional with many of the issues that we're seeing in modern society. But there are other important health indicators, and I'm optimistic that the positive effects of tracking glucose can be expanded out into other analytes that we can measure in real time. So triglycerides, maybe insulin itself, cholesterol, potentially uric acid, some of these others that are very closely associated with metabolic syndromes. And that is something that does not exist today. And I definitely don't want to step into the Theranos trap and say this will exist. We're the ones that are going to do it. But we definitely want to be part of the innovation engine, pushing other companies, demonstrating that we want to be the bow wave. This exists. People want better information about themselves in real time, even if they don't have a condition related to it. And so we want to create, the attention and the market that will be receptive of new technologies, and probably not the desktop one drop microfluidics Theranos thing, but hopefully a patch that you wear on your arm that is measuring multiple things, just like glucose in real time, and that we can make really solid, targeted, personalized insights off of.
So I'm gonna say we have 2 questions left. I'm gonna give one. I'm gonna overrule my last question because I think I have a better one now. And then everyone, I know we're at time. Feel free to drop off. We'll try to wrap up in a bit, but no worries if you have to drop off. My question, and then I'm going to have you ask us a question so you can start thinking how we can help, is will everyone in the future be wearing a CGM, maybe Levels, maybe a competitor, but hopefully Levels? And if so, how long until we get there?
I think everyone, I think it will be very mainstream to see people with a biowearable on. The way that Apple Watches are so common these days, it's going to be a consolidation effort. So you're not going to have like a bunch of patches all over your body. It's going to be a single, I think, elegant form factor that you'll wear continuously. And it'll do a lot of what the Apple Watch does today. So it will probably measure your heart rate variability, body temperature, step count, your movement, and then a bunch of molecules in the skin. So probably hydration, insulin, glucose. I think it's going to be a kind of a one size fits all solution that people are going to wear, and they may not do it continuously depending on their goals, but I don't think that's necessary. What's important is that you have a good understanding of your status, and so you might use this sort of technology once every quarter, maybe once a year. It really depends on how close you are to a situation that could be concerning, or what type of personality you are. Like for me, I've now learned quite a bit about how my body functions, and I wear it for accountability. This is the device where if I cheat on my diet, I'm going to see that negative blood sugar spike, and I'm going to be thinking in my mind, I just did damage. I just worked against my stated goals, and this is the proof. It's like a coach that you can't cheat. And so for me, that's great. It's like the ultimate accountability method. Other people don't work that way. They learn and then they move on. And I think that's totally fine.
So before we get to the last question, Ryan had an interesting comment. CGM feels like the classic case of the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet, but for health tech. Tim Ferriss, body hackers, longevity doctors like Peter Attia have been long-term advocates, just need to make it cheaper and more accessible. I think based on reading the master plan, that's pretty consistent with the Levels view. So maybe you should hire Ryan to be your paid social media intern. So is there anything the RenCo community can help with? And do you have any general questions for us? I know you mentioned, I'll just plug 3 roles and you can expand on it. Levels is hiring for a lead designer, a general counsel, and a software engineer. And so if you or anyone is a good fit, please reach out. But otherwise, we'd love to help in any way. And if there's any questions you have for us, feel free to ask.
Well, I'd be happy to help anyone get access to the beta. If you're interested, you can reach out to me and we can make that happen for RenCo. And then beyond that, yeah.
So that's how you get off the wait list. That's the secret.
You got to know somebody. No, we'll make an exception. But yeah, we're always looking for great people, and those are the 3 current open roles. But if you know someone who, I'd love to speak with Marissa, because it seems like she has, a lot of insight into the FDA considerations that we're currently working through. So, any people like that who could help us, with the awareness of what we're up against right now, in terms of what problems we're trying to solve, that would be helpful. We love to meet people who know more than we do about what we're trying to do. So, yeah, always appreciate connections to great folks. And then, Ali asked the question about data collection and privacy, and yeah, that's a really big one. We are, just briefly, like, there are rules called Hipaa Rules, which are basically the Privacy Act that touches on Medicare. They were developed to control how companies handle patient health information who are Medicare payees. So they accept Medicare payments. We aren't that, so we don't accept insurance, or we can't accept insurance, nor can we accept Medicare payments. That being said, we have built our systems to HIPAA standards despite not being subject to them. And most of that is just general good practice, right? It's encrypting data at rest and in transmission. It's not sharing any identifiable health information. So we're very, very aggressive about patient health and data privacy. And not to mention, we're working on a plain English privacy policy that we're going to post on our website that is like not legalese. It just says, your data is yours. We will not share it with anyone. We will never sell it. If you'd like to share it for research purposes, it will be anonymized, and you just have to tell us yay or nay, when you sign up. So just very, very much trying to take the right stand on this one and not, have a bunch of confusion about what we're doing and why.
just as a follow-up, I posted Levels' career page in the chat. There's some more information, links to the waitlist, links to more podcasts and stuff. So feel free to peruse that. But yeah, I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I really enjoyed this. I learned a lot. Hopefully, Josh, it was different than the other 100 podcasts that you've been on. I know you've been making the tour, so hopefully you enjoyed as well. And yeah, we'll send out the feedback form. Please fill it out with some detailed feedback. And we will also share the video internally. So just let us know if there's anything else. And I wish everyone a good rest of the night.
Thanks very much, everyone, for listening and engaging. And I really appreciate Charles and Jen for bringing me on.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Our
and
pleasure.
I will send you an email to connect you with Marissa after.
Amazing.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
All right. Thanks
Have a
all.
nice night. Bye-bye.
Bye.